Welcome to a quick demo of Nakisa Decision Intelligence, NDI, an agentic AI platform that enables global enterprise leaders to analyze complex data, compare multiple scenarios, and make strategic decisions faster and with confidence. In this demo, I'll show how a finance or real estate leader can evaluate the credit and leverage impact of operating leases. We'll use a structured workflow that mirrors the methodology used by rating agencies like S&P. We'll approach this use case in 3 steps, all performed in Nakisa Decision Intelligence. First, we'll calculate future operating lease obligations. Then we'll apply S&P adjustments to calculate lease-adjusted debt. And finally, I'll evaluate leverage and credit impact under different scenarios. You'll see how all these steps are significantly streamlined with NDI. Let's dive into each step, starting with projecting future operating lease obligations. I start by opening Nakisa Decision Intelligence and selecting my leasing administration dataset, which includes operating leases, key terms, renewal options, and payment schedules. First, I request a count of all operating and finance leases in the dataset. NDI generates a summary table showing the total number of leases by type, 81 finance leases and 79 operating leases, which aligns with my records. It gives me an immediate view of the portfolio's overall size and composition. Next, I request a breakdown by region and lease status. NDI generates a heat map showing lease type, status, and geographic region, giving me a clear visual view of where leases are concentrated and how they are distributed across the portfolio. Then I ask NDI to filter the dataset to include only active operating leases and set evaluation quarter to Q1 2026. At this point, I can proceed to extract future scheduled payments. I request to project quarterly payments for the active operating leases starting in Q2 2026. NDI generates a detailed lease-by-lease table showing total portfolio payments per quarter in USD, giving me both transparency and a high-level overview. If needed, I can enlarge the table. This allows me to view all results and sort them by due date, period end, or amount. We now have all future quarterly operating lease payments projected. This preparation will allow us to perform the next steps only on legally binding lease obligations that were established as of the evaluation date. Now let's apply S&P adjustments to calculate lease-adjusted debt. Because operating leases represent fixed contractual obligations, credit analysts treat them as debt-like commitments and discount future payments to present value. So I ask NDI to discount all future payments back to Q1 2026 at a 6% rate. The platform calculates the present value for each lease and for the total portfolio, clearly labeling it as S&P adjusted operating lease debt, providing a view of the portfolio's obligations. I now prompt NDI to show me the quarterly operating lease rent expense for the active leases starting in Q2 2026. NDI generates a bar chart with total portfolio expense per quarter. At this point, we've quantified the debt equivalent value of operating leases. Next, we'll use this figure to assess leverage and credit impact. To do it, I ask NDI to compare 2 numbers, lease-adjusted debt and reported financial debt. The system is asking me for the company's reported debt figure as of the analysis date, so I'll provide that input next. I've asked NDI to use $3 billion as reported financial debt, and it gave me the comparison between reported financial debt and lease-adjusted debt. By capitalizing operating leases, total debt increases slightly from $3 billion to just over $3.03 billion. This makes the incremental impact of lease liabilities clear in dollar terms. Next, I want to translate those debt figures into leverage and compare the number before and after, including lease-adjusted debt. Here, the system calculates debt to EBITDA using reported debt and again using lease-adjusted debt. Because the lease balance is modest relative to EBITDA, the leverage ratio only increases slightly from 0.60 times to 0.61 times. To put that leverage number into context, we can compare it with commonly observed credit categories. Without assigning a rating, the system notes that leverage of roughly 0.61 times is typically consistent with companies in the A range. This confirms that in this case, capitalized leases do not materially weaken credit posture. We can also model how leverage would move if capital structure changes. Let's model the situation if the reported debt increases to $3.5 billion and recalculate leverage with the same EBITDA and lease adjustments. In this case, leverage rose to 0.70 times on a reported basis and 0.71 times on a lease-adjusted basis. I can also open the table to see more details. I can also export these numbers as needed. This scenario simulation allows finance teams to understand how lease exposure behaves in combination with new borrowing. With these final steps, we've shown how capitalizing operating leases affects total debt, leverage, and directional credit posture, and how those results shift under alternative funding scenarios. Thanks for watching. For more videos, subscribe to Nakisa's YouTube channel and get practical examples, tips, and best practices to unlock business value.